So some of the kids looked a little scared when they didn't know who the speaker was going to be sharing the children's message, and I hadn't introduced him or anything, so I want to do that now. Actually, we met Laura first. She used to attend home when Ann was teaching, I think, and got to be acquainted then. And back in those days, Rick was a policeman in Eldora. I don't know how many years he did that. About 15 years off and on, he says. And I'm not sure if I know all the little things in between, but he worked for Lennox then for several years and was out of there before the tornado. and has been doing pest control in Marshalltown then most recently. And checked with him, and he was, I probably talked to you like on the end of February, last day or two, and you were going to retire March 1st, I believe. And so he says now he's kind of semi-retired from the pest control, but still helps down there when needed, and particularly when the bugs are around in the summer. He's indicated he'd work a little bit more. But so, known Rick for quite a while. We worked together in the yearly meeting quite a bit. He's from Bangor area. Some of you knew Denzel Schaefer. He was your granddad, yeah. So you live on that place where he lived there now. Some of you remember him. He had a corn shelling business and shelled corn for a lot of us around here back in the days. Rick is a recorded pastor in Iowa Yearly Meeting and does a lot of nursing home and pulpit supply and that sort of thing, and I've been called into that. And I was fortunate enough, I learned a lot from Rick while I was mentoring him through that process. I think he was recorded the same time you were, wasn't it, Rob? And then was Randy Nichols, another one on that same, three of you on that same yearly meeting session. So we welcome Rick to come share with us this morning and what's on your heart. And we'll leave it in your hands for now.
Well, as John said, he was my sponsor when I was being recorded, and one of the bits of wisdom that he shared with me was that a pastor wasn't worth his salt if he didn't preach for at least an hour and a half. You'll be lucky to know I'm not worth my salt. So we're not going to do an hour and a half this morning.
We were all excited when you talk about 45 minutes.
I like to get your hopes up before I disappoint. The truth of it is, and I think one of the things I do need to preface this with is that the message I have for you today is not coming from your pastor or from your ministry and council. This is actually a message that I started to prepare a few years back for when I was doing Pulpit Phil at Bangor Liberty when our pastor there was gone. It didn't come to fruition. I changed the topic and I never even finished the sermon. But I think it's a sermon that needs to be preached, because it's something that as parishioners, we see a pastor from one dimension, and that's the dimension of what you see up here and how you envelop him and how you deal with him. And the truth of the matter is, being a pastor is much more complex. There was once a pastor that was asked, "What do you love about your church?" And he said, "That's easy. It's the people." Well, that's a good answer. He was then said, "Well, what do you hate about the church?" He said, "Well, that's even easier. The people." The truth is, it kind of has to be a relationship like that. We can be somewhat of a struggle. And so can pastors. In fact, there's a story of a young man who was standing in the foyer of the church, staring at a board that had a bunch of brass plaques on it. And the pastor came by and noticed this little 7-year-old boy staring, and the boy says, "Pastor, what is this board for?" And he says, "You see all those names?" And the boy says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, those are all people who have died during the service." Or in the service. And the boy stared and goes, "Wow, Dad said your sermons were long, but I had no idea." You know, it's hard to believe that pastors need as much training as they do, because so much of what you do as a pastor is as you go. And one of the first pastors that was really appropriately called a pastor was Moses in the Old Testament. And I want to read 2 sets of scriptures to you These are scriptures that talk about what I call the two poles of a pastor, the good and the bad. So if you will begin with me in Numbers 11, verses 10 through 15, and I'm reading from the English Standard Version. I don't know what version we have up there, but if you're New King James, it'll be a little different. But Moses heard the people weeping throughout their clans, everyone at the door of his tent. And the anger of the Lord blazed hotly, and Moses was displeased. Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you dealt ill with your servant, and why have you not found favor in your sight, that you lay this burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? That they should say to me, 'Carry me in your bosom,' as a nurse carries her nursing child, to the land that you swore to give to their fathers. Where am I going to get meat to give to all these people? For they weep before me and say, 'Give us meat that we may eat.' I am not able to carry all these people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once, if I have found favor in your sight, that I may not see my wretchedness." You might say Moses was having a bad day. This only happens 2.5 months into the Exodus. And it's amazing to me that 2.5 months after being taken out of Egypt, that people would be griping and complaining so very much. They have seen the Red Sea part. They have seen the plagues on Egypt. They have been fed by manna throughout. They have been sustained by God and by Moses' leadership. These people should have no good reason to complain. But yet they are. And the truth of the matter is, if, in fact, I'm going to be honest, I find myself in that category more often than I'd like. If I'm truthful with myself, I can be difficult. I can be opinionated. I can be needy. You know, it's hard to believe, but Laura's actually insinuated once or twice that I am less than perfect. I know, I can't believe it either, but it seems to be that's the case. I'm not perfect, and neither are any of you. We don't want to be, but we are occasionally hard to get along with. We don't want to be, but we are occasionally difficult to be around. It's part of our human nature. And really, if I stop the sermon right here, it's poor pastors. Why they have to put up with all of you, I don't know. But we're not going to leave it there, because frankly, that would be a depressing message and give you a guilt trip that perhaps is a little overstated. But a year later, in Deuteronomy, verses 9 and 13 through 21, Moses has a bit of a change of heart. And it's interesting that only a year later, after he's wanting God to kill him, to put him out of his misery, he's before God again, pleading for death, but for a totally different reason. It says, "Furthermore, the Lord said to me, I have seen the people, and behold, it's a stubborn people. Let me alone, and I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven. And I will make you a new nation, mightier and greater than they. So I turned and came down the mountain, and the mountain was burning with fire, and the 2 tablets of the covenant were in my 2 hands. And I looked, and behold, you had sinned against the Lord your God. You had made yourselves a golden calf. You had turned aside quickly in the way of the Lord had commanded you. So I took hold of the 2 tablets, threw them out of my 2 hands, and broke them before your eyes. Then I lay prostrate before God for 40 days and for 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water, because of all the sin that you had committed. In doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord bore against you, so that he was ready to destroy you. But the Lord listened to me at that time also. And the Lord was so angry with Aaron that he was ready to destroy him. And I prayed for Aaron and also for you at the same time. Then I took the sinful thing, the calf that you had made, and I burned it in fire and crushed it, grinding it into small until it was fine dust. And I threw the dust into the brook and ran down from the mountains." Moses, 1 year later, is asking God to kill him instead of the people. It's not out of frustration this time, because these people are so hard to get along with, which they still are. I mean, they're building golden calves while he's gone. Moses is asking to take him instead, to let him be the brunt of God's wrath. There are the two poles of a pastor. There are the days when those people drive you so nuts, you wonder what in the world you're doing here. And the other side of that coin is the day that you hurt so badly for those people that you will die for them. Your love is so intense, so immediate, and so godlike that you're willing to do whatever it takes to keep those people with God. It's interesting because Moses' transformation wasn't a quick one. It wasn't an easy one. And to be honest with you, I don't believe it's something that comes natural to a pastor. It's something that has to be learned. And to be truthful with you, all pastors are human. Yeah, I know that's a shock. Too many of us want to put them up on a pedestal. Too many of us want to believe that because they have the title pastor in front of them, they should never misspeak. They should never step out of line. They should never do anything that would frankly be upsetting to anyone. Well, that's all wonderful, and it's totally unrealistic. And I'll be honest with you, there's times when pastors need to be held accountable. Indeed, I've been a participant in suspending a pastor and his recording because of inappropriate activity. It's not an easy thing to do. It certainly wasn't something that any of us wanted to do, but it was necessary. It was essential because the pastor had lost his vision. He had lost his step with God. And I tell you, it is, as a church body's responsibility, that we are responsible for our pastors. I believe that a pastor is called to a church. I also believe that a church is called to their pastor. When a pastor comes to you, it's because he has certain things that need to happen in his life that you as a congregation can fulfill. It may be in mentoring him, it may be in supporting him, it may be in a lot of ways. But the truth of the matter is, so often that goes by the wayside because we worry about habits that we don't like, sermons that go too long, perhaps sermons that go too short. We have a lot of reasons why we judge our pastor. And the truth of it is, it's not supposed to be that way. It's not supposed to be a situation that, excuse me, we are supposed to be the judge of the pastor. As a church, you are to be called to hold him account. You're also to hold yourselves to account. You know, I really don't believe that anyone in any church sets out to be a hard to get along with parishioner. I don't see people being that kind of person. But I can't tell you how many churches I've been in where once you start to get to know folks, there's always those folks that go, oh, yeah, so-and-so. Yeah, you got to know about them. We just have to kind of be a little more gentle around them. Every church has got them. There's a story of 3 pastors that after their 45 minutes a week work were meeting for coffee on Monday morning after a weekend revival, and they were all talking about the results and how things went in the church that Sunday. And the one pastor was smiling. He says, well, we got a new couple. And the guy says, hey, that's great. Yeah, he says, we're thrilled to death. The other pastor was smiling a little more, and he says, well, we got 2 new couples. And, well, yeah, I can see why you're smiling. But the third pastor was grinning from ear to ear. And they ask him, well, you must have done quite well. And he goes, oh yes, we lost the 3 couples that were the most troublemakers in our church. We don't believe we are, but there are times when we can be troublemakers in our own church. We can be that thorn in the pastor's side. I don't think anyone intends to be. Certainly, I see myself as near perfect, and what Lord doesn't see about that I don't understand, but that's because my perspective is a little skewed. And as a congregation, I suggest that we need to look at our perspective and say, well now, am I part of this problem? I may not be the biggest troublemaker, but am I ever part of the gossip? We all know what gossip is. Something happens, or the pastor does something, and well, we all have to talk about that, don't we? We all have to be a little bit in putting our input into that. We have to make sure everybody knows about that. The truth is, as a congregation, our focus needs to be on making this the body of Christ. And picking up your pastor and holding him both to account if he needs it, but also supporting him regardless of whether he needs accountability or not. Even in the process of discipline and accountability, there must be love when you deal with your pastor. There must be an attitude of service to that pastor. It has to be an attitude, not that we need to discipline you for your misbehavior. We need to deal with the behavior you have in a loving fashion that hopefully causes you not to err again. That's not easy, because human nature is more one to say, well, let's just figure out what's wrong with you and fix it. And you all know how that works. All you wives that have been fixing your husbands for years, how's that worked out for you? It doesn't. We don't change other people. We don't change folks' behavior. What we do change is our own attitudes, our own belief systems of how we do things and how we are supposed to do things. So what does supporting your pastor look like? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because frankly, first and foremost, as I told the children, it's prayer. Now, most of you know and have heard you're to pray for your pastor. Most of you will nod your head and say, yes, good idea, I think so. But how frequently do you pray for your pastor? And what prayers do you pray for your pastor? Do you ask for wisdom, to guidance? Or do you ask that he be shown the light? That his sermons need to change directions? That they need to go somewhere else? Lord, give this man a clue. We don't always pray edifying prayers for our pastor. We don't always pray with the pastor's heart in mind. We can all find reasons to criticize, and I guarantee you there's not a pastor out there that does not have something about him that irritates somebody in his church. I actually was on ministering council and had to deal with a situation, and I use this example, and I know that I've shared it with probably the person who did it. And that's not always a good idea, but that's the one thing about not being a full-time pastor. You get away with things that you couldn't do as a full-time pastor. But we had a pastor whose glasses were thick, and one of the criticisms was, you have too thick of glasses. And the pastor was actually upset by this. And I was both shocked by the parishioner, I was also shocked by the pastor. It's like, why are you even listening to that? That's ridiculous. Why that parishioner thought that his thick glasses was something to complain about, I don't know. I've never had that discussion. I would love to have it, but I don't think they'd appreciate it because, like I said, I've used it as a bad example too many times. So they probably aren't very happy with me right now. But the truth is, we support the pastor. We support him in conflict. We support him when we disagree. And I know you all think that nobody ever disagrees in a church. But I have to just suggest to you that we change the color of the sanctuary, we paint something, or decide to carpet or tile, and watch as the church explodes. We are diverse, we are different, and whenever it comes down to a like or dislike, we are all going to have our preferences. And believe me, I have seen some of the biggest rows in a church over whether we should carpet or tile the fellowship hall. Or that color is certainly not the color of a sanctuary. Or that cross needs to be over here and that picture needs to be over there. No, I think it should be swapped. And you know, we can get into some really ornery little discussions. For Christ-like people, we can act very non-Christ-like. And to be honest with you, it's not hard to do. We just let our human likes and dislikes, our preferences come into play without thinking about the bigger picture. I suggest we think about the bigger picture. We think about the congregation, we think about the pastor. Because in every one of those disagreements, one person is in the middle, and that's the pastor. He's going to be approached by one side and say, we need carpet. He's going to be approached by another side and say, we need tile. And you know that's the godly thing to do. When we look at that, and you say, well, now how in the world's a pastor going to get through that? My advice from being in that position a couple times and being a ministering counsel many times is for the pastor to just say, I'll let you guys sort that out. Thank you. I don't want to be a part of this discussion. You folks figure this out and let me know how it works out. Unfortunately, I've seen a few pastors get into it, and whenever it happens, the pastor ends up suffering. It's just not a pretty thing. But the truth of it is, whether you agree with your pastor or not, whether he agrees with you or not, the pastor is there to serve and to love you. You are there to serve and love your pastor. It's not an optional. If you're in church, if you're a member of this church, part of the commitment you made in becoming a member was that you would support the leadership of this church. And that goes as far as pastor, your ministering counsel, your Christian ed, all the other people that are serving this church. Doesn't mean you'll always agree with them. Indeed, many times you're going to tell them that that's the worst decision I've ever seen. I say that in love, but it's still the worst decision I've ever seen. We can't do church without conflict. We can't do church without difficulty. It is part of the nature. It's how we deal with it. And that comes to my next point. To be the kind of pastor or parishioner that you would want if you were the pastor. I asked the kids who wanted to be a pastor. A couple of them, maybe. Most of them were like, why? And the truth of it is, very few pastors go into it with open eyes. And a great deal of pastors end up leaving burnt out, dissatisfied, disillusioned, and just frankly said, I've had enough. That's a problem. It's Moses when he's looking at God and saying, these are not my kids. Kill me if this is what you're going to do, because I don't need this kind of pain in my life. If we're to be the parishioners that we would want if we were the pastor, we have to put ourselves in that pastor's shoes. We have to consider what we say and what we do from his or her perspective. What is my pastor going to feel when I say this? How is my pastor going to feel when I do that? If you're asking that question, it's a good chance you're going to gauge your response to whatever situation it is in a different light. If you know how this is going to affect your pastor and it's not going to be good, hopefully you will change. You know, talking about support, sometimes the best support you can give a pastor is when he's wrong. And yes, pastors are wrong. They can be, and they are, on occasion, 100% wrong. And when that happens, the way you respond is essential to whether that pastor feels that you support and love them, or you're just one more reason why he should go to work somewhere else, because this is not working out. Pastors have a tough job. To be truthful, I don't know why anybody becomes a pastor. And yet, you have pastors that go into this and they thrive. They do well. Their congregation loves them, and even through the conflict and all the troubles and even all the disagreements, they seem to go through well. I will suggest that a lot of that is relationship with God that the pastor's using, but I'll also tell you that a lot of it has to do with the congregation. Your relationship with your pastor. What and how are you doing what you're doing to support your pastor, or what you're not doing? The truth of the matter is, those two poles are like the North and South Pole. They couldn't be further apart. A pastor that wants to be put to death because his congregation is driving him nuts, to a pastor that's willing to die for God to pardon his pastors. That's two complete different poles. The question I have to ask for you this morning is, which pole are you pulling your pastor towards? That's the question I'll leave you with. Thank you.